I just wanted to present a little bit of a timeline about where we've done strategic planning in the past. So the blue bar shows the big organizational events in the history of the LTER network. We've been around for 44 years now. We did our last major strategic planning in 2011. And for a number of reasons, that was not revisited regularly since then. And in that time since 2011, the nature of the other networks that we might interface with has changed very substantially. If you think back to 2011, the CZO was only 4 years old at that point. It had a pretty good run of another 13 years as the CZO and another 4 years beyond that as the Critical Zone Collaborative Network. That program has now ended, so that's one piece of information or one piece of context. NEON in 2011 was just starting construction. So it wasn't real, we didn't know what it was going to look like. We didn't know how successful it might or might not be. So that context has changed very substantially since 2011. And the LTER network had only started in or was only about to start in 2012 and has now grown to 18 sites. There are a bunch of other organizations and networks that I could have included here, but those are sort of the big ones that really change the context in which LTER operates and the things that we should think we want to do or have to do. In terms of the strategic planning process, so in 2011, we developed the strategic and implementation plan. Major emphases there were focusing on network-wide cross-site and cross-network initiatives, including information management and education, and a recommendation to centralize leadership for the Environmental Data Initiative, which wasn't a thing at that point, but what ultimately turned into the Environmental Data Initiative, and also to do more centralization around education and outreach. The context for that 2011 strategic plan was that all of the recommendations would have required, or almost all of the recommendations would have required substantial new funding. And that was not something that NSF was ready to provide at that point. There was some ARA funding, which essentially supported the development of the Environmental Data Initiative and the PASTA system that underlies it, but additional funding for major educational initiatives or major communication and coordination activities wasn't really forthcoming. Our 2019 self-study, so the LTER network has a formal review by the National Science Foundation every 10 years. We've had one in every decade of the network. Our 2019 self-study focused primarily on thematic science advancements. We thought we ought to say what new science the network had developed, and somewhat on emerging directions and opportunities. So there's some pretty good fodder there for new science directions, but not much context for organizational changes or the NSF response to that 2022 review really diverged a bit from what the reviewers themselves recommended. The reviewers themselves recommended a really wide range of new initiatives and new directions, including more solutions-oriented science, definitely more synthesis, definitely a greater focus on broadening participation. The reviewers recommended more coordination on education and outreach and engagement. NSF's takeaway and NSF's particular recommendations out of that 40-year review were around synthesis and around broadening participation. And they have come up with additional resources for those areas. So synthesis support continues to happen through the LNO. They haven't increased our budget for that, but they have created new opportunities at NSF to do synthesis type science, particularly through the ultra data solicitation. And they did fund in the network office a broadening participation coordinator. In 2024, we're undertaking visioning, planning, and structuring in the network. Because the network never directly responded to the, or never responded substantively, I guess I'll say, to the review, because we need to be clear about what it is that we want to do and how the network office can support the network and how the network can operate as a coordinated group of projects and programs. So that process has involved a couple of brainstorming sessions at the May Executive Board and the June PI meetings, continued conversations with the Science Council and the Executive Board through the fall. This community, a number of conversations with committees, the Information Management Committee, Education and Outreach, and Broadening Participation. This December call. And then in January, we are planning an in-person meeting with representatives, a sort of small meeting, about 25 people, that includes some current network leadership, some rising network leadership. So that's some people who are foreseeably going to end up in PI roles within the next 10 years, but also people who are taking on leadership of various committees and various activities, who've sort of demonstrated their interest and commitment to the network. A group of early career researchers, and importantly, a group of partners and potential partners from other organizations who can really help us see how the rest of the environmental science community sees the network and where we might be missing important strengths or opportunities from our own perception or vision of what's happening. That group will not write the strategic plan. The responsibility for writing the strategic plan lies with the LTER Executive Board. But I think the input from that meeting is going to be extremely valuable for the Executive Board. So our first questions are just, what differentiates LTER? There are a ton of other networks, data providers, in some cases experimental networks and coordinated networks such as DroughtNet and NewtNet out there. What are the really special strengths that we bring to that process? And when I say we, I mean essentially LTER plus EDI. We continue to have a really special relationship with EDI, which grew out of the LTER Network Information Management System and now serves a much broader array of data producers and users. So some of those characteristics coming out of the PI brainstorming include really multidisciplinary, no matter how you spell it, the range of biomes that we cover, how collaborative we are. Our focus on place-based research seems pretty important. Our emphasis on social ecological research and the scale at which we work. And then the executive board early in the spring undertook a little focus on what are the unique tools and opportunities that we can foresee coming up in this decade. And this is just a sampling. I sort of present them as examples, but I don't want them to limit your thinking. The amount of data, the length of the data sets that we often have available, but some of the things we have not really been able to fully implement or operationalize yet include distributed experiments. We have a few success stories. We could do a much better job of highlighting those and developing new ones. Motivating within the network the coordination of data collection, mesoscale processes, and then greater emphasis on social ecological problems, and collections data is a tremendous opportunity that we haven't fully capitalized on yet. The kinds of science that excite us, there are a few examples that come out of the Science Council meeting in June. So the Science Council meeting includes all the principal investigators plus an additional person from each site. And we spent a lot of time thinking about what the most interesting questions are coming up, scientific questions, or scientific opportunities. Heat waves and phenology is a really big one. Thinking across realms. One of the things that is unique about, almost completely unique about the LTER network, is that we include forests and grasslands and oceans and alpine systems. And there are really no other networks that include that range of ecosystems, and that does present some challenges for us occasionally, but it also presents some really unique opportunities to do cross-realm science and cross-realm comparison. Lots of work already in the network on interactions with global change drivers and other kinds of disturbance, but we could be much more deliberate about that, about designing experiments that would work across sites to test those kinds of questions. Tons of other things. I think what isn't changing is a really interesting way to flip the script on the science that we do. So some of the key discussion themes that came out of the executive board meeting include surprises. That's been a continuing theme for the network. The importance of challenging and testing one another. That's a huge benefit that we get in the network. I think about, the discussions that happen in Science Council meetings, in these community calls, on webinars, synthesis webinars that we've had in the past. We push each other. We are comfortable enough with each other that we are able to do that. And it's a huge benefit to us as a network and to our science. Again, the creative ideas that can be developed and captured and elaborated on pretty quickly. So some of the concrete progress that's come out of the executive board and the working groups that the executive board put together this summer and fall include a proposed new vision and mission and vision statement. There was a working group on that, a values statement that I think we've made pretty good progress on. We've also had small working groups focusing on 50-year outcomes and synergies. I'm going to skip those because they're a little bit, there's a lot there, and I don't want to take too much time from our discussion. But I did want to share the proposed vision and mission statement. The existing statement focuses a lot on, the proposed vision, I think, is significantly broader and easier to wrap your head around. So we envision a network of long-term research sites across diverse ecosystems to accelerate discoveries that enhance the welfare of society and the environment. The existing vision statement kind of addresses the use of LTER science, but this one does it much more cleanly and directly. And then the mission is to create knowledge, inspire solutions, and cultivate learning through inclusive and interdisciplinary long-term environmental science. The executive board has been pretty happy with these, so we'll see whether there are any changes that come out of them during the meeting, but I think this is pretty close to the direction we're going to end up going. A value statement. As an LTER network, we aspire to embody open, rigorous, and inclusive science. We value a deep understanding of ecosystems and rigorous science. Might be too much rigorous there. We value transformative outcomes for our science and the people involved. We believe that deliberate collaboration and active exchange of ideas produce synthetic knowledge of emergent properties that are either unique to a specific ecosystem or shared among many ecosystems and lead to a more universal understanding of the natural world. We feel a responsibility to society through advancing and sharing knowledge, informing decision-making, and responsible stewardship. With the below values, we aim to produce tangible and intangible outcomes at the network level that are greater than what could be achieved by individual sites. I think that greater than what could be achieved by individual sites is kind of a core network value. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to skip over those because it's just too much there. We also did a SOAR analysis, strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results, but we never got to results. This covers a lot of what I covered in earlier slides, so I'm not going to dive into it too much here. And just a little bit more detail about the January planning meeting, and then let's get into some discussion. The goal is really to engage representatives from across the LTER community and to focus on a strategic vision. We want to really build on the strengths and the opportunities that we've articulated so far and are continuing to focus on, and move into a discussion of what are the activities that the network should pursue. What should we really be prioritizing? And we want input from a broad range across the network in that conversation. Day one is going to focus on framing and connecting, articulating network strengths and focusing on those key uncertainties, particularly with the input of external partners about what those uncertainties might be. Day 2 and 3 are going to focus on building a set of scenarios based on the intersection of those strengths and uncertainties. And day 3 will be really diving into what are the activities, what are the priorities, how should we be setting priorities for the network. We'll do a report on that meeting in February, and then through the spring, the LTER executive board will turn that into a strategic plan for the network, which we will share broadly later in the spring or in the summer of 2025. Current committed participants for that that workshop are here. It's a pretty broad range of external partners, early career folks. We probably have room for 1 or 2 more people if folks are interested. We really endeavored to be inclusive across sites and ecosystem types and also roles within the network.